So I'll take you to the 21st of July, that day that man landed on the moon.
Landed on the moon.
Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, well, it was a couple of days after the contact that we'd had, and we were still in ambushing positions, etc. And things had been pretty quiet. Nothing more had happened. And Platoon Commander Peter Hines had received an order to. We weren't going to follow any tracks back, but we were going to head back in the same direction we had been up till day one, or at least that's what I worked out. But what actually happened this particular morning was that the normal process would be that whatever we were going to do that day, he'd call the section commanders in, tell the section commanders go back, tell the scouts if they were going to be leading out or doing whatever, and what we were going to do for the day. This particular day, he called myself and Tony Muir in, and the two engineers, to his little orders group, apart from the section commander, with the section commanders as well. Oh, I thought this is a little bit different. It's a little bit different. So it's almost starting to smell a rat. And then when he told us what we were going to do, that we were going to go patrol to it was a deserted hamlet called Hoi Mai, I think. And there was nothing there. It was just because it had been, the pacifier removed years ago, so there was no, and I don't think there was ever much there in the first place. But we were going to patrol out to this particular area, and from where we were, and it was showing us on the map, well, isn't that where we were on the very first day when we came in and we patrolled up to the area, and it was a minefield, and the direction you're going to take us is and he was told what he had to do. He had to go in a big loop around to this area. And he said, well, I decided that, if I was going to be leading, I wanted to know as much as possible. I said, won't we be going through the side of a minefield, so we won't necessarily know where it is, because we weren't following the track, you see, and the track was posted. And I was given a Bajorki Peterson. Don't you worry about that, but you keep your eyes open, And I thought, oh gee, this is going to be interesting. So anyway, we took off, and we must have travelled, I don't know, I thought it was about a couple of thousand metres. It was a hot day, and because we weren't on a track, we were pushing past a lot of this very low, scrubby stuff. It was even like saltbush type stuff. I remember I was, because you're pushing through it. It was sort of hard going, and it was bloody hot because it wasn't very thick foliage above that. And anyway, at one stage, just before we got to where we were going to cross this track, we got the message that the Yanks had landed on the moon, and it was all very impressive. We'd been passed along little bits and pieces, during the past few days about what was sort of going on, and but the idea that we were pretty focused on what we were sort of doing. And I reckon it was just after that I came across the actual track. The track itself was it was a footpad. It was used that much. It was worn down. It was only very narrow, say a foot wide, but it was worn down. So of course the first thing I did was I stopped and said where we were, etc. And they passed the message back, and Peter Hines came up and said, right. And I think we were going to stop for a brew up. So what he was going to do in the normal process at that stage, if you came across a track, you'd ambush it, etc. So again, the normal process was to put a gun at each end of the track, basically have a platoon harbour, which was more or less like a circle around the track, a gun on each end of the track to cover any opposition that came down it, and then have basically what was going to be morning tea. So I do remember stepping over the track very carefully, well over the track, not onto the track. Of course, it ended up being the safest place to be anywhere. It was actually on the track. We were then dropped off in our positions So we'd gone on past the track, and where we dropped off was again this low shrubby sort of stuff, and then immediately in front of us were some more trees and larger bushes. Platoon was then progressively dropped off, and once that sort of occurred, we'd sort of taken our packs off, and we were actually sitting on our packs, and then it was just this massive explosion, and this huge pool of black smoke, and then there was a voice cried out, "There's been a mine explosion. Do your mine drill." And I've always thought that voice ended up being, it was Peter Hines who had actually trod on the mines, but we found out later. And from that point, it was almost like there was dead silence for just a nanosecond, and then there was this huge cacophony of sound of people shouting and screaming, and those that were wounded, it let it all out. And then the next thing was Johnny Needs spoke up. I think the platoon sergeant was badly wounded at that stage as well, and said that he couldn't do anything. Johnny Needs yelled out for everyone to shut up, and there was immediate silence. And then he set about organising a dust off. So he called out and said, "Is there anywhere anybody can see, where we can have an LZ?" And I sort of looked out from where we were and thought there was a bit of a sandy patch over to our right of Tony and myself, and nobody else said anything. So I said, "I think there's an area in front of us, where we can hack down whatever's there, and that'll be okay." And we started our mine drill. Involves getting your bayonet out and prodding in towards where the casualties are, so you can help them. And Tony and I started to do that. And as we were doing that, John Needs came walking over. And so I must have had a look in my eyes which said, "We're doing the mine drill, but you're not." And of course he picked up on that straight away, and he said to me, "You've got to take a risk sometimes, Mick." And so then I realised that we weren't going to be prodding towards the middle. We weren't going to be cutting the LZ. So my immediate reaction was I turned to. He then threw smoke in that general area, threw a smoke grenade, which is part of the dust-off procedure. And went back to the middle to assist the people there. I turned around to Tony and said, "Oh, well," I mean, again, it was like, it's been nice knowing you, mate. Whatever happens from here on in. We took our machetes out and started to slash down whatever vegetation was there, like madmen. And the next thing you know, there's a chopper, starting to come in. And of course they didn't land because it wasn't totally cleared, and I think at that stage they were then adopting a process where there were mines that they weren't going to land anyway. I think they did later on to very bad results with another battalion, but the battalion commander Dave Butler was in the air at the time, and he must have been in a Possum or a Sioux helicopter, etc. And he flew back and got the battalion doctor, and they actually flew in. But before they flew in, I think somebody asked if anybody was guarding the OZ, and it was only me. And I think Tony had from when we'd stopped cutting. He had started to bayonet his way into the centre to help people. I was the only one there, so very quickly I moved across to the other side of the LZ. And once I was there, I realised, well, that was no different to where I was previously, except that I again exposed myself to anything that might have been there. But no, nothing happened. So I actually went back to my original position, which was between where the choppers would have dropped people off and then picked people up from. I do remember they dropped a jungle penetrator, and I had a devil's own job of opening that initially. I think the bloke was about to throw something at me because I couldn't get it open initially, and then did. Then just started to help the people as they started to come out. Directed the battalion commander in. He asked who was in charge, and I said Corporal Needs is in charge. And he's just through there, but that's not cleared, sir. So, he just walked through.
And tell us what happened then when either he or the doctor trod on another mine, didn't it?
Well, it didn't happen immediately. What occurred was that everyone was dusted off progressively in helicopters. They came in and took them out. There was,
how many wounded were there?
All told, I think there was about 18 wounded. Perhaps might have been about 15 or 16 in the first 15, say, in the first mine, and one. Peter Hines had died. They all were winched up when those that could be winched up on the jungle penetrator, etc. When Frank had been particularly badly wounded, he was carried out on or put into the stretcher and then carried out and then lifted up, and that ended up being a particularly horrific sort of moment because the stretcher was unbalanced and it started to twist, and I think that and both of his legs had been very, very badly wounded, bone, etc., and the rest of it, and the blood from the spinning around sort of centrifugal force would have been forcing the blood out through him, and even though he'd been doped up, he was just screaming as it was lifting up. And of course, then they had to slow it down to actually grab it to put it in. So it just seemed like this was going on forever. That was the worst thing of the dust off that actually occurred. At the very end of that particular process, the doctor asked if there was anybody else who needed attention. I'd got one little bit in the back that had bled initially and then stopped. I think the action of trying to cut the LZ had sort of cauterised that, or it cauterised itself. And mindful of, infection at that particular stage in the game, I put my hand up and said I had a piece in the back. And he came over and promptly stuck a Band-Aid over it. It was no great wound. But for me, it was very fortunate because the battalion commander just happened to be fairly adjacent at that stage of the game. And he just pointed up in the air, put his hand up in the air, and I knew what that meant. He was saying, "Get him out of here." So I didn't argue with that at all. I didn't want to stay there any longer than I had to. But when I went out, the next chopper came in. The only thing left was Peter Hines' body. And I went out in the chopper then with Peter Hines' body, which was wrapped in the ground sheets with a good quantity of blood, and his legs, his feet were all distorted in relation to the angles they should have been at. It probably hit me fairly hard then that everything that had sort of transpired. I know initially I sat with my legs over the edge of the chopper, and I think I might have let a few words go when we flew out over the paddy fields, etc. Whereupon the American medic who was there said, "Get inside, boy." It's just
most of the choppers that evacuated did the Casevacs. Were they?
I think they must have been mainly American.
Mainly American.
Certainly the one, I'm pretty sure the one I was in. The ones I know that Frank was in because I'm pretty sure that was American as well. some of those things are sort of hard to remember in relation to the fact that you're dealing with the people, getting them onto the jungle penetrator and getting them up, etc. You're not. These are. Doesn't matter whose they are. It's only for the fact that you can sometimes. I'm pretty sure the one I was in was American, because
American accent.
Great big guy, the voice said, "On there, boy, get back from the edge there, sit well inside."
So I know you were taken to the Australian Hospital of Dongtao.
Yes.
But although you weren't back there, could you just take us for what your recollection is of what happened back at the original mine incident with the CO of the battalion and the doctor?
Well, what happened, and it was a length of time, it's probably difficult. It might have been 20 minutes, might have been half an hour. And I think they'd sort of gathered up, basically the remainder of the people who were there. They probably had got all their packs and stuff together. Their more engineers had flown in also during that first period of the incident as well, and they had cleared with their mine detectors certain areas. So I'm remiss of me to say that the two engineers that we originally had, the combat team, the mini team, were quite incredible. They had been standing up relatively close to where the mine had gone off, only a small distance down the track, and had both been basically riddled in the lower halves of their bodies with shrapnel. A lot of it had gone through their pants and all sorts of things like that. And they did have a number of shrapnel wounds, but they couldn't believe that they weren't more or less blown to pieces. They just looked at each other in disbelief. They immediately set about assisting all the wounded, etc., and all the rest of it, and doing whatever they could to clear the area. And they were terrific. That was Phil Baxter and Dave Sturmer, two great guys that I ended up spending some time with in hospital, so I got to know them, and they became good mates afterwards. Very wonderful guys, engineers, terrific blokes. But what happened was that apparently the doctor, Dr. Anderson, and it's not really known whether he stepped outside a taped area or not. He didn't necessarily, but he just trod on another mine. Obviously, they're laid in groups. Where they'd been laying them was on the side of the track, and obviously spaces that were cleared. They knew that if platoons stopped anywhere or did anything, that you'd be sitting in an area that was slightly clear and the rest of it. And that's where they mined the sides, off the sides of the track. Because the track, being the footpad, was well used. That wasn't mine. It was their supply road. But off the track, yeah.
So one of them triggered another mine.
Yeah, it was Dr. Anderson. When he eventually came into hospital, I think he came in initially and then was shipped straight out to I think he went to the American hospital. He was encased as a mummy from head to foot in bandages, and he lost his sight.
Yeah, he was blinded.
Yeah. And subsequently, he studied psychiatry and became a psychiatrist, I think that's right. Incredible.
And the
battalion commander,
he was
Dave
wounded.
Butler, he was wounded. He came in. He didn't spend as much time in hospital as we did. Of course, he had to get back and take over his battalion. But he spent a few days in hospital until he could. He had quite a few bits in the legs, etc. And a couple more of the engineers as well were wounded. And we only had one more guy wounded. And John Needs was killed. John Needs apparently received only one or two very small bits, but right in the heart. And that was all. The rest of him was just totally intact apparently. And my mate Lee Floyd was right there at the time, and he said he just couldn't believe he'd been killed. Yeah, it's a very sad day for those two. Very sad for the rest of the platoon, and all of a sudden you're then in that situation where, probably over half the team's gone home, and two are dead and not going to go home at all. Yeah.